Hey everybody, welcome to Storywise with Eric. I am today going to be reviewing a book series I just completed, the first trilogy of a much larger body of work, and that is R.A. Salvatore's Legend of Drizzt series. I just finished the Dark Elf Trilogy, which is these three beauties of a book, and I just wanted to get into sort of an overview. It won't be super in-depth. I'm not a literary critic. I'm not going to dig into the specific subtext if there is any. I'm going to more generally talk about my experience with the books and my excitement going forward and what I like about the books and maybe a thing or two that I didn't like. But I think it's important to share these things, to talk about these things, because a lot of people like myself didn't read a lot growing up, and I didn't understand why, and I believed I just hated reading, and this was one of the series that got me back into fiction. I have read over the last 10 years different books here and there. I've gotten fatigue from them though, and usually find my pace, and then I find one I don't like, and then I just assume that means I should stop reading because I'm not into it, go to nonfiction, do some self-development, whatever. But I've hit a really nice stride finding a pocket in which I enjoy reading that allows me to take breaks and read some of the classics that I never could get through, so that I know after I get through that book, whether I like it or not, I'm going back to a fantasy world that I care deeply about. But as an aspiring author, I do want to expose myself to a broad scope. So this is going to be an explanation of why I like this series, as well as how I go about jumping back and forth. So the reason I started with Homeland is I've heard a lot about R.A. Salvatore. I have always appreciated Dungeons & Dragons, but I didn't understand the game. I didn't understand the role-playing. It always felt like my brain couldn't comprehend the role-playing aspect as far as decision-making. I can act, I can play a character, but the decision-making in Dungeons & Dragons, I have like analysis paralysis. I played Baldur's Gate 3, and that still showed up there where I didn't want to make the wrong choice. I really work linear in that way, and I was almost too overwhelmed and afraid to kill my party because I wanted to stand in front of the enchanted mirror, and that's what cursed the whole team, something like that. And then keeping track of stats and all that, it was just overwhelming for me, so I never got into the game, but I've always appreciated it and enjoyed that world. So as I said, this is a series. This Homeland was book one of the Dark Elf Trilogy, and it takes you to the Underdark where the Drow live, and I read this book and enjoyed it. It didn't challenge me to keep up and read the subtext, and it wasn't written in this super poetic way, which I appreciated. A lot of times I feel you have to be this poetic, brilliant writer to create a compelling work. And as an aspiring author, I feel like I have to emulate that. So reading this gives me hope that I can just speak from my voice, which is what everyone says, right? Write in your own voice. And R.A. Salvatore definitely has a voice. You can tell you're reading his work, but it's not Shakespeare. And that's okay with me. But it's not just a story. It does have subtext, but it's a lot more in your face. There is a matriarchy. And the interesting thing about that is the matriarchy, in my opinion, is modeled after the spiders they worship. So Lolth is a spider queen. That's their deity. And what do spiders do? Well, they consume the males after they mate with them. So in Homeland, you get to learn about the Drow society and how that's essentially how it is the matriarchs of the family have various suitors that they mate with to create offspring and live for 500 years, but they have these men that serve them and sleep with them and help them bear children so they can continue their line, but is rooted in the spider world. So when I say I don't read the subtext, I don't know if his intent was just to emulate the world of a spider in this way, or if it was reflexive contrarianism, which I won't get into the depth of my philosophical beliefs, but I do want to point out that whether he intended it or not, I enjoyed this juxtaposition from the patriarchy to the matriarchy. The reason I said reflexive contrarianism is because the idea of it is if this is bad, then the opposite of it must be good, and that gets us into a lot of trouble. So if the patriarchy is bad, then the matriarchy must be the solution and be good. But we find out in this book that is not the answer, because it is not the answer. So I appreciated a world where it showed that the matriarchy is just a different level of toxic. And it's really the combining, the coming together, and the compromise that brings us forward. Yes, that was my attempt at Bob Ross, but I feel I failed it, but I'm not going to redo it. But in Homeland, we go through Drizzt's, which I had a hard time. This whole book, I called him Drizzt, and playing Baldur's Gate, I heard his name as Drizzt. So that was an adjustment for me. But by book 2, I got it. And in this book 1, we're learning about his world. So there is world building, there is some history, but it's not overwhelming, which I appreciate. So if you're interested in this book series, understand what you're getting is a nice crafted world with a new society you get to learn about, and honestly a main character that isn't flawed in the traditional way, which I also appreciate because it gets complicated in writing story. Having this flaw in your character that is tested by the main conflict of the novel. I don't feel like that's present here in Drizzt's world. I feel like his flaw, if anything, is he's born into a society that doesn't honor his goodness. He doesn't want to perpetuate the Drow society. He sees through the lies and the manipulations of the school's teachings and the way of life. So his flaw is that he is better morally than the society of Drow elves is. It's kind of a weird flaw. So he has not that much moral ambiguity. And so for him, it's just trying to adjust to the society. And ultimately, I don't think he ever wanted to. He was always going to pull away. So he isn't really tested. He's more forced to make a decision to adapt or run away or abandon the tenets of the Drow society. And ultimately, it's just a fun story. It doesn't require a lot of thought, so I appreciated it. And so what I did was I read that book, then I went into Of Blood and Fire by Ryan Cahill. And then after that book, I bought Exile, book 2 in the Legend of Drizzt series, the second in the Dark Elf Trilogy. And I say Dark Elf Trilogy because I believe he has about 39 books, and they're variously jumbled together in trilogies and probably some quintets, I don't know. But Exile is, without doing a bunch of spoilers, is the aftermath of book 1. And so it furthers the problem, but expands Drizzt's world in the Underdark. And I enjoyed that because some of the early moments in Homeland are expanded on, and in books, when something happens, it has to happen for a reason. So when you see a moment, you wonder where that's going to come back, how it's going to come back and influence the future story. Unless it's a self-contained book, it's going to happen. And Exile does a good job of that by taking some moments that happened in the first book and then making them a really big foundation of what happens in the second book while expanding the story and furthering it along, which was easy to follow, fun to read. I think Exile was my favorite in the trilogy because of the dynamics of how the story progressed and some of the characters in this series so far. Characters aren't that unique. And what I mean is, if you took away the said Drizzt, said Zaknafine, you might not know who's really talking. In some ways you can, because the females in the family talk much more aggressively and down to the men, so you could tell a female was talking, but you wouldn't know, is this the mother, is this the sister, is this someone from a different house? You wouldn't necessarily know that because they're not really written with that much nuance, which isn't a problem. I thought it had to be like every character was this very, very unique experience. But I've realized in this book, it doesn't have to be. It showed me that it doesn't have to be. But Exile brings in some new characters that have a very specific voice. And I enjoyed that. I really, really enjoyed it. It made me, in my head, hear the accent in a different way. Because I don't try to, but when I read a book, I'll give a voice to the character. Unless there's just my own voice, because there's nothing unique in my head about that character. But Exile took that and made it so that I could tell a difference in the characters, and I appreciated that. And then the third book, Sojourn, I really did enjoy this book, but it took a while to get into. I don't know if it was a speed thing. It just felt slowly paced at first, but essentially you're taking the character from the Underdark and now he's leaving and going to the surface world, which has an adjustment period, and it starts to play a lot more on concepts that Exile did, and Homeland set up. Homeland is set up that these Drow elf race society is a superior society. They are essentially racist. They believe they are superior to everybody else. In Exile, we meet other races that believe, and for good reason, that the Drow elves are these murderous, violent people. So they are also judging the Drow elves fairly because of their actions and culture of that society, except for Drizzt. So now he's facing this hate from other races that he wants to get to know, and Sojourn takes that and expands it. And I'm currently reading the next book in that series, and it still continues. There's still an adjustment. So it's taken at least 3 books for Drizzt to even make friends and become accepted on a small scale, which does reflect life and how we do judge each other that are different based on the history of what we have been told about a certain race, a certain religion, a certain gender. But taking individual inventory of those people, we find out that it was more of a prejudice, or, certainly in Drizzt's case, he is not like his brethren, his sisters. He is not like that at all. And it takes time because you see his face and his white hair, and immediately it's Drow elf, devil is here. So I think that makes Sojourn start a bit slower, because as heroes' journeys go, he is in the unknown world. He's in the surface world, which has been told to him in Homeland. It is terrible. Everything up there is misery. It's hell on earth. And why would you ever want to go up there except to raid and kill some elves every once in a while? But if you're committed to Sojourn, you need to give this one time if you start to lose interest in it a little bit. And I am not above skipping a paragraph or two because some details I just don't want. And that's every author I've ever read. I know I'll do it in my own book that I'm writing, and it kills me that I'm going to make people do this to me, to skip a paragraph, to skim read a paragraph because I don't need the history of this, or I'm not interested in this, which some might think is a terrible thing, but I'm not one of those people. I want to enjoy the book, and if something's in my way of enjoying it and it's not vital to the story, I'm okay skipping it. I certainly don't do it a lot, but in Sojourn I did some of that. But once it got past, 50 pages or so, I got into it a lot more. But I was worried, and that's one thing that stops people from reading, and stop myself, is if I'm not into it in the first 10 pages, it can kill my experience. But that robs me of the ability to experience something great. So I'm glad I stuck with it. I'm committed to sticking with it. I have read a book that I skimmed a lot of because I wasn't into it, and that was Catcher of the Rye, which is an American classic, and it just didn't capture me. I didn't, maybe it was too rich in subtext and too metaphoric, and I'm not looking for that. I don't know. I enjoyed that book for the voices in my head, but I just skipped a lot once I got halfway through, or somewhere in 3/4 of the way through. I can't remember. But so far, I don't have a favorite exactly, but Exile is up there, and Sojourn, barring the first 50 pages or so, really captured me at the end and put some more characters that really spoke differently, and I adored. So it did get me emotional in some of these books, and I appreciate that. Any book that can make me feel something, I think is special, because that's what we really want to do as an artist, is we want to make people feel things. And these books were an experience, and I'm looking forward to continuing, and I will continue and jump back and forth because these are very digestible reads. They're not going to challenge you mentally and emotionally. They're just going to be a fun cruise down a highway. And I think we need to have those types of books, not to call them palate cleansers, but that's sort of how I feel, is if I get disappointed in a book, I know that I'm picking up Homeland, or I'm picking up Sojourn, or the next in the Icewind Dale trilogy, which is what I'm at now, and I'm going to be able to reset and get excited again. So if this review isn't that in-depth, it's because I don't want it to be. I want you to understand conceptually what you might expect in these books, but also more in line with helping you understand maybe what has prevented you from getting consistent with reading in the past, like me. And this is my experience. So if one person experiences it, we're not that unique butterflies. We are very similar in that we all experience things that somebody else has experienced. So if I've experienced it and you're there now, this is the way I got through it, and maybe you can too, because I have refallen in love with reading, and I'm so glad I did, because it took over 30 years to care. And sometimes that's because I just didn't find the right material that captured me, and then sometimes it's because I kept reading things that I didn't like and not having the palate cleansers in between each big book to get me back on track. So thanks for joining me. I hope you'll check out these books if you like fantasy, if you like Dungeons and Dragons, if you like expansive worlds that you can stay in for 39 books and counting. I think he has a new one coming out where it's not Drizzt, but it's his daughter, perhaps. And he also has another series, like a lot of series. But before I forget, the only thing I didn't like, I kind of touched on some of the parts being slower, which again is in every book. There is one aspect of these novels that I don't particularly care for and tend to skip over after I got to Sojourn. The first 2 books, I read these parts, but you get these moments. To show you an example, the Ranger, you can see the font is different. And then you go to the next page, and essentially, as you can see, it's by Drizzt. So this is like his diary or something, and it's a cool idea, but it takes me out of the narrative of the story, so I don't like it very much, and I've basically skipped them in the new book that I'm reading because I don't like the way it changes the pace. But it's a cool idea. It's just not for me. So again, is that enough for me not to like the book? Hell no, it's not at all. It's not a deal breaker, and I don't think it should be. And it's not bad, but it's not for me. And I think as a reader, you get to decide that for yourself, because if you think something's not working for you in a book, it doesn't mean the book is bad. It just means that you don't agree with this detail. You're not a fan of it. You keep going unless the whole book is that way. And you're like, I did not want to read a book that's just diary entries. And there is one book out there that was recommended that I haven't put on my list because I think it's all told through some kind of a journal, not Diary of Anne Frank, but some kind of fantasy type book that they go to a cabin or something, and it's like you find the journal and you're experiencing the horrors of what happened there. I'm just not sure. I can get into that in another video about how I make my choices of what I will and won't read. But I did want to just quickly say that as subtle and picky as that is, that's the only 2 things that I really don't jive with in this novel series, but it will absolutely not stop me from reading the series. I do enjoy it. So hopefully you'll check it out if any of that sounded interesting, or at least I hope you find what you're looking for and continue reading and falling in love with it as I am doing myself. So until next time, journey well, my friends.